Welcome into the Pushing the Pile 2025 NFL Draft Special. I'm Mike Renner. Joining me today is Chris Trapasso for Hour 1. Emery Hunt's going to be on in Hour 2, and we're going to be breaking down everything Round 1 this hour and going through a Round 2 mock draft in the second hour. But it was an eventful night last night. 32 picks, 4 trades. The big one off the top that we're going to start with here, the Jaguars making the move of the night, going from number 5 all the way up to number 2. It cost them a lot to do so, but a franchise-altering move from James Gladstone, the 34-year-old GM, in his very first year. Liam Cohen, new head coach. What were your thoughts as that all went down? Because the rumors were spreading before, probably an hour and a half before we started hearing whispers of that number 2 pick being for sale. I actually got confirmation before the draft that it was going to happen. What were your thoughts when it all went down?
Well, I think it's funny that you bring up that this is a Jaguars GM who's only 34 years old, because what a statement to make your first couple minutes making a huge decision for this organization. I love the player. I think everyone agrees it's the one player that we all agreed upon with Travis Hunter, that he is a transcendent prospect. And whether he plays wide receiver or corner or both, he is going to elevate just the juice that this team has. And I think that's a team in the AFC South that has needed a lot of juice for a long time. I love the addition with Trevor Lawrence and their new head coach, Liam Cohen. But you do have to factor in that it was very expensive. And I understand it from the Browns, and we can get into that in a little bit. But for a team that just needed someone to help Trevor Lawrence and maybe help the defense as well at corner, I love this aggression from their new GM.
Yeah, my initial thoughts were, one, this is, if you're going to have a GM trade away first-round picks, it's going to be the guy who was with the Rams, right, over the past handful of years, where they went 7 years without a first-round pick, right? They know how that works, how to play around that. And he even said that in the post-draft presser. He said, I know how to make rosters work with the, quote-unquote stars and scrubs model. And if you're going to do it, though, they better be franchise-changing stars. And Travis Hunter, I think everyone agrees, qualifies in that mold, whether it's at wide receiver, whether it's at corner. And I love this for them, because for the Browns at 2, if they just stood still and picked him, they already have a full-up cornerback group. He may never have seen the football field at the cornerback position. That's not the case for the Jaguars. I think he could legitimately play both ways for them. Obviously not 100% of the snaps, but a good chunk. And offensively now, you have Brian Thomas Jr., you have Travis Hunter, you have Trevor Lawrence. That trio, very reminiscent of what the Bengals have in Cincinnati with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. You're just going to have a great offense. And Liam Cohen dialing it up, you are going to have a great offense with that trio as long as you keep those guys in the building. So I'm a fan of this move from their perspective. But from the flip side, from the Cleveland Browns side, I love it even more. I think this one, if you just stood pat and drafted Travis Hunter, yeah, he's great, but you don't have anyone to give him the football. And again, he wasn't going to be able to play both ways for you. You already have 3 quality cornerbacks there. Maybe next year, maybe down the line he could have, but I just don't think he moves the needle as much for them. But now they get all this draft capital. They have those 2 picks now at the top of the draft. They have the starting pick, number 33 at the top of the draft, and then now 36. And we're talking about all these great guys still on the board. Mike Green from Marshall, Shedeur Sanders from Colorado, Will Johnson from Michigan. Like, they could add, everyone said get a wide receiver and a cornerback in Travis Hunter. Well, they could add both a wide receiver and a cornerback right here, right off the rip in the top of the second round. So I love it for them. They had to get cheaper. They had to get the cap relief. And they haven't had a first-round pick since 2021. And also, Mason Graham's a dog. Mason Graham is a darn good football player. I don't know where you had him on your board, but this guy was number 4 on my board. I thought he was a true, not necessarily blue chip type of prospect, because physically he doesn't fit that mold, but he had some of the best tape in this entire draft class, and very, very good tape historically when you compare him to defensive tackles.
Yeah, I think if you're just grading the draft day navigation, you have to give a higher mark to the Cleveland Browns, because yes, it was probably very difficult and it was bold to move off the pick that ultimately could have landed you a true blue chipper in any class in Travis Hunter. But this is not a team that's ready to contend in what has become a really loaded AFC. And I like the return on investment potential for Mason Graham, who's only turning 22 in December or in September. And the fact that he was a 3-year big-time producer at Michigan. Defensive tackle, if he's a good player, he can be an anchor on that defensive line for the next 7 to 10 years as this team really starts to rebuild. And, of course, what you mentioned, getting the extra pick, potentially using that as ammunition to get a first-round pick quarterback next year. Hats off to Andrew Berry. It was probably a difficult decision, but I think it was the right one for the long-term interest of this organization.
The other big surprise for me, big storyline, another team that was a storyline coming out of last year's first round. They did it again. Terry Fontenot, the GM of the Atlanta Falcons, he drafts not one, but 2 edge rushers in the first round. 2 of the biggest athletic marvels in this draft class. Jalen Walker at pick 15, a guy from Georgia who a lot of people had going top 10 in their mock drafts, fell to them, one of the best value picks per my board on the in the entire draft class. He was 5th on my board, goes all the way to 15. And then they move a future first-round pick to get back into the first round, 26 overall, trade up from 46 with the Rams, and go get James Pierce Jr., the Tennessee edge rusher. What were your thoughts on this Falcon strategy?
So I was really at odds with what happened here because I loved James Pierce. I thought he was an elite edge rusher prospect. And if you would have told me, and if today we were talking about at 15 overall, the Falcons picked James Pierce, I would have said home run selection. Good job. But like you mentioned, they address what has been a huge need for the last 10 to 15 years for that organization at 15 with Jalen Walker, who's presumably and is best playing on the edge. And what was weird about the trade up for Pierce, one selection before that, the Giants moved back into the first round to pick Jaxson Dart, a quarterback. And the 2026 pick that they had to part with was a 3rd rounder. Then at 26 overall, the Falcons, like you mentioned, have to trade a 1st rounder to get another edge rusher. So this was a team in the Falcons that came into this draft with only 5 selections, and now they're already dipping into next year, kind of depleting those early assets. When I think this is a good team, but it's certainly not a club that doesn't have any holes. So I love the player, but it was a huge, one of the biggest overpayments that we've seen on draft night for a team trading up.
Yeah, I think what they gave up, you better be confident in your evaluation on James Pierce, right? It felt like the Dallas Turner move last year from Minnesota. It's like you better think this guy, and that's why you do it, right? Is because more than likely than not, they had this guy as a top 10 player in this draft class or a top 10 sort of talent. That's the only way you justify the amount of draft capital they gave up to go up and make this swing. But I do think from a team building perspective, and again, we talked about the cap of the Cleveland Browns, the Falcons are in an interesting situation now where the 2 highest paid positions on a football field, quarterback, defensive end, edge rusher, they now are cheap for the next 4 years at minimum. Now, obviously, with Kirk Cousins and his contract, get that off the books. It's going to hurt them the next year and a half, or 2 years. But after that, so when these guys are all hitting their prime, when Penix is hitting their prime, when Jalen Walker and James Pierce are hitting their prime, all of them are cheap. So there is that window that you're kind of playing for now, and that I think they're trying, and why they make this move, is they're trying to line it up for, I guess that'd be 2027. You have a great cap window. You can add a ton of talent in free agency for that year. And if you draft well and you hit on these guys, all of a sudden you have a team that's very much ascending and can make a play at a run for a Super Bowl championship there in Atlanta. All right, those were the biggest surprise trades for me. The biggest surprise picks, though, may have been the one that didn't get picked for some people. Everyone wanted to talk about Shedeur Sanders, the Colorado quarterback. I didn't get to watch the broadcast. I was broadcasting myself, but I heard it was a little over the top and how much they talked about a guy who didn't get selected. But everyone, or not everyone, but a lot of people thought when the Giants moved back into the first round that they were going for Shedeur Sanders. But actually, Joe Schoen's son ruined it by posting an Instagram video that it would be Jaxson Dart. What were your thoughts when that all went down, Chris?
Well, I first thought back to Hard Knocks last year where Joe Schoen's son really wanted Jaden Daniels, and he didn't want the team to let go of Saquon Barkley. So I think Joe Schoen might have a future GM in the making in his own family because he ultimately tips this pick. I was a little surprised, but ultimately this was an organization and a regime with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll that would have gone 4 draft classes not picking a first-round quarterback. You can't just make a living as a GM or a head coach, completely passing on the game's most vital position in the first round. And I think some of the potential entitlement, the bad interviews played a little bit of a role in the fact that Jaxson Dart didn't have any of those issues and is a better athlete with a similar arm, similar accuracy, and similar problems under pressure made this ultimately the pick for the Giants.
Yeah, I think there's two things that I want to hammer home with Shedeur. One, his tape was not top 10 tape. The amount of people I talked to that were just like the people that I trust in quarterback evaluations, not a single one said franchise, like 100% franchise guy. Like there were not a lot of people going to bat for him in this draft class. And when it comes to the NFL, and when it comes to maybe 4 or 5 teams willing to take a quarterback, it is such a yes or no sort of thing. It's not, Daniel Jones went 6th overall to the Giants back in 2019. If he didn't go to the Giants, he probably would have been like a 3rd-round pick, right? It is such a unique position that it is a yes or no, and there's only a few teams willing to make that yes or no. And with Shedeur Sanders, it's that, and he is not physically gifted the way first-round quarterbacks are. The only guy who had comparable physical tools to him that went top 5 over the past decade, Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow had the greatest maybe college football passing season of all time, right? So there just is not a great track. This is not you don't even have to factor in the off-field stuff and the baggage that comes along with Shedeur Sanders to have him not going in the first round. It is all on tape. It is all in terms of his physical projection. It is not necessarily first round. So I don't think I'm surprised whatsoever that he ultimately fell out of the first round. Not to say that he can't be a good NFL quarterback. It's just he doesn't fit the profile that usually comes with first-round quarterbacks. He was not a first-round player on my draft board, and obviously not for a lot of NFL teams. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to get to some superlatives, hand out some awards, who had the best picks, who had the biggest surprise picks from the first round of the NFL draft. Coming up right after this. Welcome back into Pushing the Pile here. We're going through some superlatives from night 1 of the NFL draft. Chris, who did you have as the best pick? We saw 32 of them. Which one was the best one last night?
Well, I think we already talked about it, but to go more at length about Mason Graham to the Browns, I think, again, to get that extra first-round pick is absolutely huge. Again, the boldness from GM Andrew Berry, I just thought that was something that we should really be applauding him for, because for the longest time, the last couple months, we all had almost written in Sharpie that it was going to be Travis Hunter to Cleveland. And to get someone that is very young, that plays a position that I think is growing in importance in defensive tackle, who is a 3-down player, helps Myles Garrett in the twilight of his career, maybe take a little bit of attention off him. And again, to get those extra picks for a team that is clearly rebuilding, that was one of my favorite overall value picks, even though it was the number 5 overall pick in this draft.
Yeah, I think if Travis Hunter didn't exist, right, if we could just, because sometimes, draft class to draft class, you don't always get that guy sitting there at the top of the draft that's special. If he didn't exist, I don't think a lot of people bat an eye if Mason Graham goes number 2 overall, right? He's that good of a prospect. It's not as if you traded down and all of a sudden you're, woe is me, we're just flipping a coin to see if a guy's going to be good. It's no, Mason Graham's going to be a darn good defensive tackle. And that was obviously a big need for the Cleveland Browns heading into this draft. So I love that one as well. My favorite one, it's one of the teams that got talked about a bunch because of the trade they made, but the first pick they made, Atlanta Falcons, Jalen Walker, that is a cornerstone piece to a defense, in my opinion. I cannot believe he fell to 15 with, one, just how good his tape was this past fall. He is a guy that is going to be just a playmaker. We had some guys drafted like a Michael Williams, like a Shamar Stewart in similar ranges who you hope can develop into guys who make splash plays, who can be difference makers. Jalen Walker, you flip on any game last year, and he's making a play routinely that just he shouldn't make, that other guys can't make. And also, it's one of the biggest needs for the Falcons. They have, over the past decade, had the fewest sacks in the NFL. They've desperately needed an edge rusher, it seems like, every single year. finally got to address it this year. And lastly, like, Walker is what the modern edge rusher looks like, with all these hybrid schemes that have guys roaming up front that you don't know what they're going to do any given play. Can he drop into coverage? Can he play against the run in the A gap if he's lined up there in a 2-point stance? Can he rush the passer off the edge? He can do all that. So for Raheem Morris and that defense, he got a new chess piece that I just think is going to make life difficult on opposing offenses. So that one to me really stood out.
Yeah, and this was, again, something that the Falcons, I mean, you look at all the mock drafts over the last couple months, it was usually some type of edge rusher, and it was rare to see Jalen Walker all the way at number 15. I thought a lot of people had him going number 8 overall to an in-division rival, Panthers. So it was really surprising to see that he was still available. And to your point, the fact that he can play off the ball at linebacker, maybe not great in coverage, but has immense range, and then gives you a little bit of that Micah Parsons, Von Miller vibe on the outside at a similar size with the bend, speed to power conversion. Again, we're not going to factor in anything that they did after with the James Pierce trade up, but that pick alone, I think, made a lot of sense for an organization that desperately, desperately needed more edge rushing help.
All right, what was the biggest surprise pick of last night for you?
So you hinted at it, Mike. I think Mykel Williams going to the 49ers at number 11 overall. We just heaped a ton of praise on Jalen Walker. He was still on the board. James Pierce, we talked about him a bunch, how good of a prospect he was. He was still on the board. And it felt like the 49ers, after losing Malik Collins and Javon Hargrave, their biggest need was actually at defensive tackle. Derek Harmon was still on the board. Kenneth Grant, we saw go a few picks later to the Falcons. It was even Walter Nolan, who went to the Cardinals at 16. It felt like any one of those players had a much higher floor than Mykel Williams. And if you look back 2022, his first season at Georgia, you felt like, man, Mykel Williams, in a couple years, he might be the first overall pick in the draft. But he just never improved from that first season at Georgia. His career pressure rate was 11% in the SEC, which is not very good at all, especially for someone who's a first-round edge rusher, much less someone who goes inside the top 12. So for a 49ers organization that has seen a lot of their defensive pieces leave in free agency or, just not on the team anymore, I was surprised that they didn't go with someone who I think would be more of a ready-to-go player while they still have Brock Purdy relatively cheap and are ready to win now. I think there's a chance that Mykel Williams can develop, but I think this was a very risky pick for the 49ers at 11 overall.
No, I don't disagree with anything you said, because I am surprised they didn't go for more of an immediate impact guy, because Williams, I do think, is a project. Now, I think he'd be an impact run defender early on. Maybe that's why they went with him. They obviously lost a handful of games down the stretch because teams ran out the clock on them. They couldn't get those late stops. But I will just defend it a little bit by saying this. He was my favorite developmental edge in this draft class. His tool set, his skill set at only 20 years old still, one of the youngest draft prospects in the entire class, is built to play 4-3 defensive end. And he was not that in college. He was a 3-4 defensive end at Georgia. Kicked in on the interior, had to two-gap a lot, had to eat up blocks. He is a guy who, if you just let him go, be an edge rusher, wide 9, out on the edge, get ahead of steam, use those long arms, I think you could see a much different type of player in the NFL. And he goes to a spot that is going to let him do that and has one of the best defensive line coaches in Chris Kosarek. So all those put together, it might not be an immediate impact guy, but I'd be very surprised if he is not an impact player by year 3, year 4, and justifying this pick ultimately. My biggest surprise has to be Emeka Egbuka to the Bucs. This is one, every year there's one pick, because anytime you mock a player to a team and it's not a need, when the Bucs obviously have a need at safety, they have other needs on this roster, they objectively do not have an immediate need at wide receiver. They have Mike Evans. You just re-signed Chris Godwin. You liked what you saw from Jalen McMillan, last year's third-rounder as a rookie. There's not like a spot for him right away. And so if you put this in a mock draft a week ago, Bucs fans would have been down your throat. They would have been saying, what the heck are you doing? You have no clue. The Bucs don't need a wide receiver. That's why it's a surprise. I'm not going to hate on the pick, though. Emeka Egbuka is awesome. These are old wide receivers. Chris Godwin's going to be 30 after this season. Mike Evans is 31 and going to be on in a contract year. He may not be there much longer. He will see the field, maybe not only this year, but year 2, year 3, year 4. it feels like when Jackson Smith and Jigba got drafted by the Seattle Seahawks. A lot of people are like, how's he going to fit in as wide receiver 3 there? Not a lot of people are questioning that pick now, after he was their top dog last year and now the only guy left in that receiving core from when he was drafted. So that's what this pick feels like to me. I don't think a lot of people are going to be questioning it. It's a long-term move for a team that has been exceptional in terms of their decision-making in the Jason Light era. So it was a surprise, but not a bad pick in my opinion.
Yeah, I was a little surprised in that. I mean, I agree with a lot of what you just pointed out about the whole dynamics of the long-term ability of this pick with Egbuka at 19. I didn't feel like he was the 19th best player or even close in this class. He played more in the slot as his career progressed at Ohio State. We know that Chris Godwin is best as that big slot receiver in Tampa Bay. And it did feel like there were better players. Malachi Starks was still on the board, obviously. Nick Manwari, we still haven't seen even get selected. So I think that would have been a better marriage of value and need for this team that we know can win the NFC South, that can win playoff games. Baker Mayfield is, getting close to 30. I think going in a different direction in round 1, probably on defense, and then flipping back and maybe adding a receiver on day 2 would have been a better way to approach this draft for the Buccaneers.
We shall see how it works out for them. All right, those are our favorite and our biggest surprise picks. We're going to get to our picks we would have done differently right after this. Now we're going to put on our GM caps here on Pushing the Pile, and we're going to say which picks we want a do-over for their respective franchises. There were 32. We're not going to love all of them. I'm not going to go in too hard, but just say we would have gone a little different direction. There's no harm in saying that. So, Chris, what's the one pick that you want to get back into that war room and call someone else on the phone?
Yeah, Cincinnati Bengals. To pick Shamar Stewart at number 17 poses a lot of risk. We talked about Mykel Williams in the last segment. I think there could even be more with Shamar Stewart, who is very similar to their 2023 first rounder, Miles Murphy, who was this specimen that was athletic but not quite productive in the ACC. This one from the SEC. I would have gone with Malachi Starks because I think that Bengals secondary was a huge problem last season. And we were seeing Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins score 30-plus points a game, and their defense would allow 35 points a game down the stretch. So I thought that would have made a lot more sense for this team in terms of he's a pro-ready player that can do anything. He can play in the slot. He can be your split field safety, make plays down the field at the intermediate level, and he's a great tackler. So he would have helped the Bengals' run defense right away, too. Was really surprised that as some of those defensive linemen came off the board in front of Cincy, that they didn't pivot to a safety that they're now going to have to see in Baltimore in Malachi Starks.
Yeah, that one, I'll be honest, I wasn't surprised. The Bengals have a type at defensive end, and it's the same type that drafted Miles Murphy 2 years ago, and it's the same type now that's drafting Shamar Stewart. It's like the Spider-Man meme. They're pointing at each other. They're very similar prospects. They are unbelievably explosive athletes. Do they know what they're doing on a football field? Not every play, and it shows up on tape for Murphy still 2 years in. Hopefully Stewart's developmental curve takes a little bit quicker than Murphy's did, but that's the surprising thing to me is that they need the help now. They don't need the help 3-4 years from now. They need a guy that make an impact now. So Starks definitely would have. Manwari definitely would have. I don't think Shamar Stewart's going to do much for you on a football field this next fall. My pick that I want to do over for, it's the Miami Dolphins. Going Kenneth Grant, nose tackle at pick 13. It's just, I think it's a worse even misappropriation of value than the running back conversation. We talk about, should you take a running back top 10? Should you take a running back that highly? But nose tackle, if you just go back through like the past 5 drafts, how many pure nose tackles have justified a first-round pick? It's Dexter Lawrence, and then it's like no one else. And he was actually even before that. He was 2019 draft. There's just not a lot of guys who are making an impact on the nose, and it's a position you can usually find later on in drafts if you really want a run defender. There just aren't a lot of high-end pass rushing guys at that nose tackle position. Can Kenneth Grant be one of them? I mean, TBD, he is a good athlete. He is not nearly the testing athlete that Dexter Lawrence was coming out of Clemson. He did not have near the tape that Dexter Lawrence did coming out of Clemson. And Dexter Lawrence was even a later pick than Kenneth Grant was. So this one was a big, big surprise for me. It was obviously a big, big need for the Miami Dolphins, but it felt like they tried to shoehorn in a need earlier than they had to. If you really wanted to go defensive tackle, I would have loved Derek Harmon here, the Oregon DT. He's obviously not a pure nose tackle. He's a little bit more versatile, but if you want to throw him on the nose, I think he can get the job done. Or if you really want a nose tackle, just wait till the third round. There's a bunch of nose tackles in this draft class. And go anywhere else on defense because they need everything defensively. So you drafted the lowest value, the lowest paid position on defense nowadays. Nose tackles are getting paid less than like off-ball linebackers. So all those reasons, I just did not like that Miami Dolphins pick.
Yeah, and then what about Walter Nolan? He ultimately goes number 16 overall to the Cardinals, and he gives you that first-round ability as a pass rusher. If you're going to pick a defensive lineman in round 1, if he's good against the run, that's great. You can hang your hat on that early in your career, but you need to be able to generate a lot of pressure. And I think Kenneth Grant at 6'3" and 330 pounds is a good run defender. And like you mentioned, he is kind of a dancing bear at that size. Does he have anywhere close to the pass rushing ability of, say, his teammate Mason Graham or of Walter Nolan or of Derek Harmon? I don't think so. And I think the numbers back that up too in terms of pressure rate. Kenneth Grant's was a lot lower than a lot of his other contemporaries. So I get it that the Dolphins probably felt like they had a void after not having Christian Wilkins on that defense last season. But like you mentioned, at 13 overall for a nose tackle who's not Dexter Lawrence or not Vita Vea was very head-scratching for the Dolphins.
Yeah, I actually went. I didn't even have him as the best nose tackle available on the board. I had Tyreek Williams over him, who went 15 picks later. That's more the area where you start feeling comfortable drafting one of those nose tackles. All right, what's your next pick that you're like, I would have went elsewhere?
So I'm going to piggyback off my own answer from the previous segment. I would have gone James Pierce over Mykel Williams for the 49ers at number 11 overall. That I felt like, yes, what we just talked about, Mykel Williams can come in, can be that sturdy base 4-3 defensive end opposite Nick Bosa. But again, I'm always going to lean toward the big-time pass rushers. We're talking about pressure rate. I mentioned it before. Mykel Williams' pressure rate was 11% at Georgia. James Pierce in the SEC, same conference, 21% over the past 2 seasons. And they rushed the passer about the same amount of time. So this was not a sample size disparity between these two players. I think the 49ers need more pass rush help. They got it with Leonard Floyd last season, opposite Nick Bosa. I would have just gone in that direction and actually stopped the Falcons from overpaying to get James Pierce a lot later in the first round.
Yeah, I do think if I'm the 49ers, I don't hate that where they went. I know Pierce specifically was not on a lot of boards for the first round because of off-field, because of character concerns. That's why he falls to where he did. But agree that his tape was much better than that mid-20s where he ultimately came off the board. My do-over pick, it's going to go late in the first round. 28 overall, I just mentioned him. Tyreek Williams, the nose tackle from Ohio State. Not that it's necessarily a bad pick. I just would have loved to have gone Josh Connerly there if I'm the Detroit Lions, and done pretty much exactly what I think Washington's about to do. Washington's going to put him at left guard because they have Brandon Coleman, who they drafted last year, that they already said they're going to flip to the right side. They're going to put him at left guard, and they're going to groom him to be the left tackle of the future once Laramie Tunsil's contract expires in a few years. That is sound team-building strategy. For the Detroit Lions, who have a aging left side, you have a 32-year-old Taylor Decker. You have Graham Glasgow, who this may be the last year of his career at left guard. You have a big need there to keep this dominant offensive line, this dominant running game that you have, to keep that moving. I would have gone what the Commanders did one pick later and just said, he's our left guard, and then once Taylor Decker hangs it up, he's got 3 more years left on his deal, that might be it for him. Connerly's your left tackle of the future. You're set. You don't have to worry about it. You got 2 ducks protecting Jared Goff there. I would have loved that for them. Again, I don't think they got a bad player in Tyreek Williams. I think he's going to be great for their run defense. But I just don't think that, I just thought at that point in the draft to get a tackle with Connerly's upside is something I would have chased for them.
Yeah, and it feels like you mentioned it, that you were higher on Tyreek Williams than I was. Tremendous run defender, probably the best run defending interior defensive lineman in this class. But if that's really what the Lions were after, we are going to see a bunch of big-bodied defensive tackles picked tonight in round 2 and round 3 and into round 4 and 5 that could have given them 70 to 80% of what they got from Tyreek Williams. I think it's hard to find a blocker of Josh Connerly's athleticism and versatility later in the draft.
All right, those are our revisionist picks. We're going to be back after this grading the trades. We saw 4 of them on night 1. We expected maybe a little bit more fireworks with no one having moved any picks. We got early on, had a big lull, but we're going to break down and give grades for all of them right after this. The Jags and Browns kicked it off with a massive trade involving the number 2 and number 5 overall picks. We're going to grade all 4 of the trades from the first round here. It involved number 2 overall, so the Jags got 2 overall, 104 overall, and 200 overall. Number 2 overall obviously turned into Travis Hunter. Browns got 5 overall, turned into Mason Graham, 36, which is coming up here early in the second round, 126, a 4th rounder, and then that 2026 future first round pick. What grades are you going to give both here, Chris?
So for the Jaguars, just for the player, I would say A+, because we all love Travis Hunter. He can maybe revolutionize the wide receiver and cornerback position in terms of being one player doing both. I give it a B+ for the Jaguars because on every single trade chart that you probably looked at or could look at on the internet, it was a really big overpayment for a non-quarterback. Now you can contend that this is the second most important position in the NFL and he's playing 2 spots, but I think that has to lower the grade a little. And for the Browns, I'm going to go with an A because the only reason it's not an A+ is because the same reason. They're moving off of the ability to pick Travis Hunter. But again, for a team that is rebuilding, that needs future early assets, they even get one like you mentioned at 36 overall tonight. Very job well done by Andrew Berry to move off the pick, get those extra selections.
This is one of the rare trades, in my opinion, that I loved it for both sides. You know, I don't always love a trade up, especially when it's not for a quarterback. It's hard to recoup the value. But they didn't end up paying quarterback premiums. They paid a little bit of a premium for the top of the draft, but not quarterback premiums that we've seen in years past when guys have gone up for like Trey Lance or Sam Darnold. So they didn't have to give up that much. And Travis Hunter just is different. Like you are going, if you're going the stars and scrubs model, they better be stars. He is a star. But he doesn't even have to be the number 1. You got a number 1. You got Brian Thomas Jr. Now you've given Trevor Lawrence basically, he's a kid in a candy shop where it's just like for the first, 5 years of his career, it seemed like he was, or 4 years of his career, it just seemed like he was struggling to find anyone open. Now he's going to have guys open every single play. So just a different era there in Jacksonville. Whereas for the Browns, they just had to do it. I love that they recouped a bunch of value. For them, they would have wasted 3 years of Travis Hunter's career with what they have at quarterback right now. Now they don't have to do so. So I love that one. All right, next trade here. We had to wait a while, and it was the Giants trading back into the first round. They got 25 overall from the Houston Texans. The Texans got that 34th overall pick. Pick 99 in this year's draft, back in the 3rd round, and then the Giants' 3rd round pick, TBD, obviously, where that ends up because it was the 2026 3rd round pick. What say you for grades on both sides of this?
I'm going to go A- for both teams. If you look at those draft pick trade charts, this wasn't much of an overpayment. And we normally see when a team has to come from the early stages of round 2 way up into the first round to pick a quarterback, that's where we're usually okay with an overpayment because, of course, quarterback is the most vital position in the NFL. Do I love Jaxson Dart? Do I think he's the savior immediately? Probably not. I think it's going to take time under the tutelage of Brian Daboll for him to ultimately become a quality quarterback in the NFL. He has to learn not operating such a gimmicky offense that he had at Ole Miss. So I like that the Giants ultimately picked a quarterback, didn't have to overpay a ton. And for Houston, they see Donovan Jackson, who I think they would have picked, the offensive guard from Ohio State, go right in front of them at 24 to the Minnesota Vikings. They said, let's get out of here. Let's get extra picks. This is still a team that I think needs to build a few more pieces around CJ Stroud while he's still on that rookie deal.
Yeah, for the Texans, I'm going incomplete just because we don't know who they're going to get yet. And 34 is still kind of a premium pick. That'll obviously factor into the grade. But I do think the offensive line class was cooked. And so if the offensive line class is cooked in terms of like the real first-round guys, well, why not just get more shots to take on those mid-round guys? Because you can still find interior offensive linemen day 2 in this draft class. There's a bunch of tackles to guard converts that teams like, but just at 25 overall there, you weren't going to draft any of those guys. And from the Giants' perspective, I'm going to go A- for me. They didn't have to pay the quarterback premium that you usually talk about, but I'm not sure they had to trade up for Jaxson Dart. And I had Dart far lower on my board. I didn't see him as a first-round talent. Obviously, great developmental. If you're going to develop a guy in this draft class, I think he probably had the best tools and the best tape to do so. And they get to do that. He gets to spend a couple years on the bench with those quarterbacks that they have there right now. All right, Giants. They moved up to 25. Very next pick, we had the Falcons move up to 26 with the Rams. This one was a little bit costlier. We had the Rams got 26, but they also got 101 overall. So like a weird trade. They moved up into the third round of this draft class, whereas the Rams got 46 overall. They got 242 overall, but then they got that coveted 2026 first-round pick. What do you think about this one, Chris?
So in terms of just the trade itself, it would be close to an F for the Falcons. But I do love James Pierce, so I'm going to give it a B- for the Falcons, even though they did double dip at the edge rusher spot. And for the Rams, I think we could talk for hours about how the Browns have set themselves up to pick a quarterback next year. What about the Rams now having 2 first-rounders with Matthew Stafford nearing the end of his career? I think it was really smart by one of the more shrewd front offices. I'm going to give the Rams an A to ultimately do this because they didn't like the board. They figured we can get more ammo for next year, and they probably just got a crazy offer that they simply could not refuse. So I think hats off to Les Snead for ultimately making this trade.
Yeah, from the Falcons' perspective, it just depends on your grade on James Pierce. Like you said, if you would have taken him at 11 overall, then this should be a home run because you're thinking with Michael Penix and how he looked last year, you're drafting later than 11th overall next season. So it's not going to cost you that kind of draft capital for a guy you thought was top 10 pick. I didn't see him that way. This was truthfully the range I saw him, so they're not recouping that surplus value to me. I give it a C from their perspective. And then from the Rams' perspective, this is kind of their business as usual. They love acquiring picks. When they didn't have all those first-rounders, they made up for it by just scooping as many guys they could day 2, day 3. So from their perspective, obviously TBD of who they pick, but going to give it an A from a value perspective, getting that future first-rounder. Last trade, Chiefs, Eagles. I don't think I've ever seen a Super Bowl inter-trade between the teams that won and lost.
Me
It
neither.
cost like anything. 5th-round pick. I love both the guys that they got, though. I think they both got the ideal fits for their respective teams. Jahad Campbell, linebacker, do-it-all, basically Zach Bond, but at the collegiate level last year. And then Josh Simmons, one of the best offensive tackles in this draft class, but obviously falls to here because of the injury concerns, the patellar tendon tear that he had in the Oregon game. Not great. So we're not going to grade it, but A-plus picks in my board for both those guys. All right, we grade the trades. Now we're going to grade the draft itself. How did Green Bay fare, and how do we think future drafts are going to fare right after this? We're back here on Pushing the Pile talking about Green Bay, Wisconsin, hosting its first ever NFL draft. I have to start by just giving my hats off to Roger Goodell, the NFL. What they've done turning the draft into a weekend-long spectacle, it's the envy of every professional sports league. I mean, the fact that they can dominate the headlines for months of sports coverage compared to the NBA, compared to the NHL, while they're in their regular season, everyone's talking, leading shows with Shedeur Sanders and guys who haven't even been picked yet. I think it's been great for the game and great for, obviously, us as draft analysts. But what did you think? I was on camera all night last night. I didn't get to watch the coverage. What did you think of the scene there in Green Bay?
Well, I think the next step, too, that needs to be applauded by the NFL is how they've decided to move away from Radio City Music Hall in New York City, where that was such a classic spot, and bounce around the entire league. We've seen it in Cleveland, we've seen it in Philadelphia, Chicago, and to me, the setup at Green Bay in Titletown with the, in the shadow of Lambeau Field doesn't get any more picturesque than that. That is vintage NFL. Roger Goodell announced that there was over 150,000 people in attendance for the first round. It looked jammed. And just, again, seeing the lights of Lambeau Field in the background, the setup was really cool. The green room was great. I thought it was one of the better setups that wasn't in a downtown like we saw in Detroit last year.
I am very biased on this. In one of those aerial shots,
I'm going to let you
definitely see my parents' house,
go.
which is right next to Lambeau. But I didn't get to watch, but I'm going to read a text from my brother, because my whole family was there, was at the event. He said, I attended the draft in Chicago, and I attended the draft in Green Bay. It's just different here. Everyone was happy and wanted to see people in other teams' jerseys. I saw a take where it's the perfect combo of everything Wisconsin people love, football, beer, and festivals. It's very true. There was a cool sense of responsibility from everyone from Green Bay not to let down the NFL and have the draft come off as a dud. Like every person I talked to wanted to know how many people were in attendance. Go listen to the crowd reaction to Mark Murphy announcing the pick. It was just a good feelings all around kind of night. And it was cool. I watched some of the clips back. Clay Matthews crushed it with the Bears Still Suck prank at the start. It was a cool scene. But we have another cool scene on tap. 2026 is supposed to be Pittsburgh. The NFL was in their bag when they were scheduling these drafts, right? Going Green Bay to Pittsburgh back to back. They knew what they were doing. What do you think we're going to see down in the Steel City?
So 2 of my best friends went to college at the University of Pittsburgh, Point Park University. So I actually visited Pittsburgh a lot. I think, again, talk about a classic, storied NFL franchise and storied NFL city. Pittsburgh is certainly one of them. So you're right. Back to back to go from Green Bay to Pittsburgh is fantastic for the NFL. It's always interesting, too, to see how the NFL sets it up. Is it at a stadium? Is it down the main drag, down Forbes Avenue in Pittsburgh? Or is it across the river in between the Pirates Stadium and the Steelers Stadium? I think that is one of the more picturesque cities as well in terms of their NFL setup. And I think Pittsburgh is going to really show out just like Green Bay did last night next year for the 2026 draft.
Yeah, I'll say this. Pittsburgh's skyline, it's not the highlight. You don't want the skyline in the background. You want like the rolling hills and the rivers. That's where it looks super cool in Pittsburgh. There are some areas. They can get some nice aerial shots in there. But I love the setup they have there in the downtown with where the stadium is, right on the river, with the baseball stadium nearby too. I think it's a really cool setup. And obviously Pittsburgh, if you think Green Bay showed out, I think Pittsburgh is going to be an absolute zoo with how many Steelers fans across the nation are going to go back home to watch that team. 2027, though, it's still up for grabs. So that's set in stone next year, set in steel next year. Where do you want to see 2027? Because it hasn't quite been announced yet.
So I'm a little biased. You love everything Green Bay and the Packers. I'm from Buffalo. I'm going to say come to Buffalo. Go back to back to back in terms of cities that have crazy fan bases. The Bills are building a new stadium. They'll be moved into the new stadium in Orchard Park. I can't say I know if it should be in downtown Buffalo or in Orchard Park. That's one of the suburbs of the city, but that would be another highly attended draft that would just be, again, great for TV. Beyond the draft itself, the setup, I think, in Buffalo with the brand new stadium, Highmark Stadium there, would be really, really fun and would be a huge boon for the city of Buffalo, too.
I have to agree with you. You took mine. I would have gone Buffalo, but just for the sake of argument, just for the sake of being a little different, because I think Buffalo deserves one for all those reasons you mentioned. But Nashville opens their stadium in 2027 too. Ooh. And Nashville, when they had the draft there, 2019? It is an unbelievable setup for holding 200+ thousand people downtown. There's so much to do. It would be such a party. And to me, Nashville would be an insane scene for an NFL draft.
Yeah, I mean, right down Broadway, that was one of the cooler aerial shots with the drone that they had then that started on the stage and showed that blocks and blocks of hundreds of thousands of NFL fans. So I think the league probably wants to bounce it around, but if they want to go back to Nashville, that would make a lot of sense because they know logistically that it works and it looks great for TV.
I will say I loved all the interviews of the bachelorette parties who didn't know that the draft was going to be that weekend.
Yes, that was really good.
Just inundated with people. That got me going. All right, Chris got to go, but we're going to bring Emery Hunt on for hour 2 to break down day 2 mock draft. We're going through all 32 picks of the second round here, and we're going to predict where each team could go coming up right after this.